Well, I have the pleasure today of introducing you to Mr. Doug Snyder. Doug has served the Chapin Foundation as our digital CFO for a long time, like 12 years.
Before Tori.
Before me.
Tori plus 5. Tori plus 5.
He's been the wind beneath the wings here. But anyway, Doug is here to talk to us today about financial stewardship, which is, of course, kind of at the base of everything that we're all doing, especially in the nonprofit world. One thing that I truly believe, and I know that y'all are living into it, but the nonprofit business is a business, and the financial aspects are of even heightened importance because we are receiving money from the public, and we have to be good stewards of that. So Doug's going to talk to us a little bit about that today, but I'd like to just, by means of introduction, tell you a little bit about him. Doug Snyder, CPA, has served nonprofit clients in South Carolina for over 30 years. He grew up in Greenville and attended the Citadel. He began working for an international CPA firm in Columbia after graduation. He began his own CPA practice in 1992 and moved to Charleston. Doug previously served over 20 years as a Together SC board member. He was there in the SCANPO days. Some of you would remember SCANPO. He is an emeritus board member and a former chair of the Citadel. He currently serves as board member of the South Carolina Commission on Higher Education, the South Carolina Association of CPAs, and the Low Country Advisory Board of Truist Bank. Doug enjoys basketball, book reading, and collecting, but he basically spends most of his time in efforts working with his wife to support their 23-year-old twins. One is in law school and one is in seminary. And as a side note, that is what has bonded Doug and I together for years, because I'm doing the same thing with my kids. So anyway, Doug, take it away.
All right, good morning. All right, thank you. Wow, thanks for being here today. And I do go way back. I think, you might remember Cookie. Cookie used to help with Chapin Foundation, so I'm very historical and have been around. And I really do appreciate your being here today and your enthusiasm, and I know you would have showed up because you want to know about finances for nonprofit organizations. But I feel a little bit like I'm back in the Citadel because at the Citadel you had to go to class, right? And I think when I looked on the Chapin website, if you want to get potential contributions from Chapin Foundation, you needed to attend the academy, right? So I appreciate you being here, even though maybe you're showing up just because it's required. But it's good that you're here, and I appreciate it. Now, I have handouts today, and the way we're going to work it today, it's going to be a conversation. It's not going to be me just presenting things, because really I'm going to learn more from you than you do from me. But I want it to be a conversation, and as we go through, there is a handout that you can mark up or walk through. But I really need you to participate in either questions or insights, failures, successes, because I know that as we walk through this, people with different organizations and different aspects or different roles, so we all can add to certainly the financial aspect on your nonprofit organization. So with that, we're going to get really way out of here at this point. So if you, all right, you're going to have to tell me where do I go? You're going to do it? You're going to take me there? Okay, so your handout, you'll see the second thing there. Either like when you go to restaurants now, you can take a picture and get the menu. I want you to do that. Or if you have a laptop, which didn't like we were doing on the laptop, but on your phone you can go and either you take the snapshot of the Q code up there, or you can go to the address there, oev.com. So what I'm attempting to do here is get a kind of a survey throughout the room where we are. So there's only going to be 5 questions here. You can't get it wrong. All right. So as we wait on that first poll to come in, I need you all to do this for me. As it relates to the finances and stewardship, management and stewardship, as we start today, on a scale from 0 to I know absolutely nothing really about the finances, to, hey, I could probably teach this course and more. 0 is don't know. 10 is, I could teach it. Please scribble down what your knowledge number is. Whether that's a 0, a 10, a 3, but it's going to come into play towards the end. So I need to know your knowledge number now before we start. Okay, so, wow. So I wasn't intended to do this, but I never would have dreamed that 30% would have been other. Who has another year in besides June and December?
September.
September?
Same. Same.
Same?
September 30th.
Right.
September.
So the next poll that I put together was that, are you connected to any hospitals or healthcare or something? Really? It seems to me, there's a lot of things like retail organizations have like a weird, funky February year end, some other things. But nonprofits usually have December and June, but now I can say September, because that's usually healthcare and maybe some governmental organizations have September, October. But anyway, okay. So, here's what's good. So I'm going to lock that down. So how about now? Got another question? Okay, who can tell me how I decided to use these dollar values for revenue?
Impacts which forms you file.
What kind of forms?
Tax forms.
It's like, maybe I'll have to say you can't answer some of these. Dan probably put
Happy
10.
to sit
If
back
somebody
and-
put his knowledge number was 10, I'm just letting you know. But that's exactly right. The 990, we'll talk briefly about that towards the end of the conversation today. But it's depending on what forms you file for there. But you'll see, again, from an organizational standpoint, that's where we are. All right. All right. Okay, so what is this telling us? There may be a correlation between the previous slide as far as revenue and size as to the number of board members. Can I ask someone who is more than 10, is there any here more than 15? Any here more than 20? Okay, so 15, do y'all have 15, 12?
16.
16, okay. So again, dealing with boards, when you feel like you've got 6 to 8 board members is tough. There's a multiple, and once you get above 10 and then 15, it's a different dynamic altogether. But it's what we have to work with, and that also plays into some things we'll talk about this morning. Okay, one more.
Can we hit all three of them?
No, only one. What's your biggest challenge? They're all big. They're all big. Wow. Does this surprise anybody?
I'm surprised the board, the finding and retaining board members isn't higher.
You want to expand on that a little bit? Because I could expand on it, but I want you to.
Well, for me, it was a toss-up really to prioritize growing revenue versus the board member piece. But I think for me, the board members finding and retaining. I don't know that finding is that difficult, but I think retaining, because I think from my very brief experience so far, there's a lot of excitement around board service, but then when you really start talking about the work and the hours and the financial responsibility, I think people don't realize what they've gotten themselves into sometimes.
Right.
And then that's where the retention piece is a little challenging.
Okay.
And I hear that board member challenge from a lot of cohorts, so I'm just surprised that that wasn't higher. But I can see why revenue is high, that one too.
So,
I'm
yes,
gonna
ma'am.
elaborate. So our board is supposed to be 20 members and we're at 12 right now. But we're having huge problems generating revenue. And so we're fine because we don't have board members that can't go out and fundraise for us to help grant write. We're not getting the people in to bring the money to us, but we need the money as well to keep the programming going. So I almost wanted to say it's 50-50 for our organization to answer that question. We need both.
So I'm going to get in trouble with Tori on this because this isn't the governance presentation, this is the finance presentation.
Governance is next time. Stay tuned.
So I might show up and ask questions.
Okay.
The critical part here, and what we all know, but I don't know if you have it mapped out so much. I think you probably do, but they don't necessarily. They almost go hand in hand because you try to have different board members with different connections, with different backgrounds, with that, and whether or not. The next slide will feed into this. But whether or not you kind of strategically do this to get people on the board that have those type things, that some people love to fundraise. Some people, if you say fundraise, they will run in a matter of moments. So this is not a formal poll, but an informal poll of, I don't care what the size of your board is, how many on your board have more than two that are really focused on the finances and helping out as treasurer? I see all those hands go up. Really? Okay. Oh, really? Well, that's fabulous because I'm telling you across, I would just say in South Carolina and the nonprofit boards, typically what you see is maybe that one is really focused, and you may have a second, maybe a third, again, depending on how big your board is really focused in and understands the finances. Right? You may have a banker on the board, or an accountant on the board, or maybe even a lawyer that understands finances, or somebody that works out in, another for-profit that understands finances. But what usually happens is when you get those people, whether it's one or two, that anything financial comes up, they point to that person. Okay, what do you as long as that person's nodding yes, then we'll do it. Whether that's necessarily the best thing from a financial standpoint to do or not. So, but kudos to you that are able to get those people and people with either financial backgrounds or coming from, and I would think here in the Myrtle Beach community, you probably have the luxury. I don't know whether you've been able to yield from it or not, but there are a lot of people that are retiring here that have a lot of background that can help out from the financial side And again, they have the time and the knowledge to do that. So that's something certainly that we want to focus on. Okay, all right, let's go to, thank you for that. So now we'll go, so you're here today, again, to learn. You want to help me? Because you have a role at your organization. But what I want you to walk out of here today thinking is part of your responsibility, no matter what your role, is to help cultivate financial literacy throughout your whole organization. And the whole organization is not just you, it's not just a couple people, it's all of your staff, it's all of your board members, it's all of your volunteers, and it's other stakeholders, whether it's grantors or things like that. But really, it's a responsibility to develop an overall financial literacy. And again, it's not that somebody needs to go know all the detailed accounting, results and all those type of things. But we do need to make sure that that everybody kind of understands, especially starting out at that staff level, kind of a why you're doing things. Why am I doing this? Well, we're doing it for good. But there's always financial impact, and that's kind of from the standpoint of what you're looking for and where we're going to. That's where we are. So it's a responsibility, a little bit more than just understanding it from yourself. All right. So the responsibilities is really, it's in two parts. It's in financial management and financial stewardship. So we kind of use it in the same phrase. Financial management and stewardship. Why are they different, or how is it? So financial management includes budgeting, kind of what do we need, how do we pay for things, how do we go and raise funds. Then it's cash flow, and hopefully we have some fun conversations about cash flow, but we don't necessarily bring that up all the time, but you can't really not focus on that when you're talking about nonprofit financials or any organization's financials. Cash flow, and cash is king, but cash flow is there. And then of course financial reporting, that's what you have to report to, whether it's internal or external reports, you need to work on those. Financial stewardship, well, that's accountability. And so from that standpoint, the accountability, again, runs all across the gamut, because it's not only internally with the staff and the employees, but the board, there's accountability there. But more importantly, from a nonprofit organization, the accountability is really to the communities that you serve, but even specifically if you have grantors or funders or people who actually contributors, that accountability is a little bit higher even than it is in the for-profit world. And then transparency. Again, a lot of things happen if you're not transparent. And even if things are going great and you're not transparent about it, a lot of times things don't go as well. So you always kind of have to keep that up front, that there's some things financially that you just don't need to tell the world, but there's a lot of things and what activities you're working on from a financial standpoint to be very transparent about. And then of course, what everybody loves is compliance, whether that's reports, whether that's with accountants, whether that's with the tax, whether that's with really the IRS or the State Department, Secretary of State. We just need to make sure that we comply with all of those things. And so, as you look at it, you think, well, the financial management is the what? The financial stewardship is the why as it relates to finances. And so, come on in. We're pretty casual. But the reality is, and I don't have to tell, everybody in this room knows that the main thing is the mission. Right? So we could talk about numbers, budgeting, compliance, all those type things, but everything needs to be tied to the mission. And so as we go through and talk about the financial aspects of whatever area we're in, certainly the mission drives it all. But we do have to have financial management and stewardship supporting the mission. So budgeting, probably everybody's, second favorite subject? Let's talk about establishing your financial goals. So I need somebody to kind of give me a less than 1 minute overview of how they do the budgeting process. Don't everybody jump in, I just want somebody to tell me about their budgeting process. I'll let you go.
Oh, you go. We look at.
She's texting potential board members. She's working on that. So while she's doing that,
We look at what our goals are for the year and what we spent the year before and kind of how that balances and then where it fits in with where we think we can fundraise and get grants to kind of make sure that we are able to, achieve what we want to achieve, but do it within the means that we can raise the money.
So what year end do you have?
Summer.
And when do you have your budget prepared?
We do it at our last board meeting, so the beginning of December.
Okay, so you kind of have it geared up for the next year. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Our goals are simple. We give away books, so we raise funds and we give away the books as fast as we can. So we keep about 600 in the bank. And I don't know how to make a budget because we spend all we get in. And we have very little bills. It's all volunteer.
Right. Yeah,
So,
that's very interesting.
I don't know how, every time we make a budget, it's so, I don't know, it's just sort of nebulous, I don't know.
So if you give away books, how are the books paid for? Or people just give you the books?
We get Chapin Foundation, we get individuals, we get churches, we get organizations, anybody that'll give us any money.
So then you take the money, put it in the bank,
And
and then
buy
buy the
books.
books. Okay, all right.
So how do you make a budget when we spend all we get?
Well, do you have a target? I guess this is going to be a very silly question,
Right.
but do you have enough books? Do you have enough books to give out?
No, we can give out a lot more books if we can get the money.
Right.
Right.
And so that's kind of so do you have a target, like when you're raising funds, you say, hey, we're trying to raise X amount of dollars this year so we can give away X amount of books?
Well, we sort of, in the past, we've averaged about 20 to 26,000 a year.
Okay.
So, that's
Dollars to
dollars,
dollars. How many books does that associate with?
spending on books, right.
Okay. But how many books does $26,000?
All right, it would, 26,000 would buy a little less than 2,600. We average 11.12 cents a book.
Okay, right. Okay.
So it would, if we're getting $10,000, that'll buy 1,000 books, or about 900 books.
Right. And so the other statement that you made
Yes.
is that we're just volunteers. That's all we got.
Is what?
We just have volunteers. That's all we have.
Right.
So we don't have payroll.
No, nothing.
We don't have rent. We don't have utilities. We don't telephone. I mean, people use it. So that's a unique situation, which you're fortunate. And so how many board members do you have?
We have about 8 or 9.
Okay. And so they're all probably in tune and they're out there asking
They all
for.
help.
Yeah, they all.
Yeah, that's a board member, he's our youngest.
Yeah, okay. Wow. And you got to come today? Yeah, that's pretty good. That's terrific. No, that's fantastic. And I guess, from that standpoint, where you have organizations that have these missions and even these different, a lot more than just one thing that they're focused on, is one avenue you think about. It seems like your avenue is obviously you have one goal, one mission. You just may want to consider from a board standpoint, really to step out there and say, hey, we're trying to go to, you know, $50,000 a year or something. The luxury you have, and again, those people that are here with budgets and cash flow and everything else, you're going to help with the cash flow conversation too, but that everything you bring in, you spend, but you don't overspend, right? So you're kind of holding it there. But from what I think what you said on your December budget, does it go into just 1 year, 2 years, 1 year? Okay. Does anybody here have like a 3 or 5 year budget planning? Okay. All right.
We have goals, we just don't budget that way. We
Okay.
just do 1 year at a time.
Right. Okay. So that's, you know, it's kind of the important part about as these things work together. When you're setting up the budget and you're moving into the next year, what those financial goals are as it relates to, you know, the mission and what you're trying to take on. So from that perspective, you know, that's a great example though, going from all volunteers, the money we raise is what we spend. That I don't think any other organization here is like that. So you might be all the way to the other extent where where you're having to really do the revenues and the expenses. So now that you've texted that potential board member, you're going to talk about your budgeting.
Sure. So we are at year ends in December. So about August, I'll pull the current year's reports of actuals and look at next year and goals and what we know in terms of big federal and state grants, what those ebbs and flows are going to be, because they do every year. And then I just start building out that next year's budget draft. And then usually by October, our finance committee is reviewing it, tweaking it, getting it to a point where we're all happy with where it's at. And then in that November board meeting, they take it to the board, we present it, and then they vote, and then it's in place to start in January.
Right.
So.
And so it sounds to me that you may have a challenge from just, even if you have grants that are either promised or you're going after, typically those don't always run on calendar years. And so what you have to focus on in your planning and budgeting, both the revenues and the expenses, because if you're having to hire people all year long, but the grants don't come in until certain times, then again, we'll talk cash flow in a few minutes. But the budgeting process, it can be difficult. When you look at it in a whole year, everything can match up. How many here on their budgeting budget a zero at the end? We get all revenues and all expenses. Does anybody? Huh? What?
Like zero-based budgeting?
Yeah.
Yeah, for each year.
Okay. You don't do that? I thought they were getting those. Does everybody do zero-based budgeting?
No.
What? You do zero-based budgeting?
Yeah, our revenues and expenses are zero-based at the end of the year.
You said no. You don't do zero-based budgeting? What do you do?
I mean, we budget that our income will exceed our expenses.
Okay. So a lot of times, again, everybody working for or talking about nonprofit organizations think, oh, you know, you're not there to make money, right? But, so, I hate that I'm picking on you, but.
Is that the wrong seat?
Yeah, you asked for it. So explain to me a little bit about, okay, you're going to make more revenue than more expenses. I've got some reasons why I want to do that. Why does your board feel like they want to do that?
I mean, we, especially in our fundraising efforts, the world changes very quickly, so we definitely know what we think we can make, but we are much more conservative on what we think will happen in case something goes away, or it isn't there, or an event doesn't turn out the way we think. So we're definitely more conservative on that, and we'd rather you know, have money to put into reserve or put into capital. At the end of the year, if we have it, then end up that the, you know, money doesn't come in, but we've spent it or needed it to run our programs.
Okay. And that's great, because that, you know, if I were making a suggestion to anybody, I would suggest that that's what you want to try to do. To you know, while zero-based budgeting, you're getting it tight, or you know, you're in a situation to where you can go from year to year and get all those revenues and all those expenses. But as you said, things change so dramatically that you need to. Yes, ma'am.
Well, a question that I had too, and maybe it's like a leading question, but couldn't one of the categories on the budget reflect a goal, a financial goal of a reserve?
Right, that's right.
So that might be how it could get to be zero, but you still make more money than you thought you might.
Right. And to your point, Tori, there's different terminology that you get to the bottom when you have excess revenue over expenses. Is it a general reserve? And then, again, I've messed up, I've jumped into the governance, and now I'm going to, do you have fundraising? Do you have a fundraising part of the Chapin Academy? Okay, well.
Oh, no, we will.
Oh, well, there you go.
This is only episode 2.
I know, okay, well, so I can only mess up so much. But I will jump into the fundraising part of this, because, you know, it has to be talked about when you're talking about the finances, is that, you know, we love, you know, fundraising, and everybody, especially the higher up you get. Usually if it's a $100 level, you know, you can get $100 and, you know, it's not name associated. But you start moving into, you know, 1,000, 5,000 and on up. And those people, they want to make sure those dollars are spent on X. And that's great. And so yes, this donor will take $10,000 for X because, you know, we need $10,000. But putting that together as to, is that what you really need? And you may be able to spend that $10,000 very quickly or within a year or whatever the grant period is. But what you find is sometimes it gets too restrictive. So you always want to start out trying to raise funds unrestricted. So that's probably not a big aha for anybody in the room. People don't like doing that just because it's like, I'm just doing it. People like to tie it again to things. But certainly, because you know, you have to many times hire the employees, keep the lights on, and those type things. That's not really fun, and that doesn't show the pictures of what your mission is trying to do and helping your organization you're trying to help, or the people you're trying to help. But in reality, that's just important, because if you didn't have all that, you wouldn't have your organization. So as it relates to budgeting and doing that, that comes into play too, because it's not just we're going to fundraise for this. This can be, is it restricted to this, so that when we fundraise for that, we'll do that. And I would guess that in your organization, you do have, I'll call them different columns. You probably are fundraising for 2 or 3 different things. We kind of have to keep track of those type things. So from that standpoint, it's just important that you keep them separated. And monitor and adjust. So from a monitoring standpoint, I really do, it's usually, I will say smaller organizations, not necessarily the larger ones, because it becomes a different aspect. But in budgeting, they're worried about the monthly telephone bill, and you said you look back to what we did last year, what we did, and try to do it month by month. And I'm not opposed to doing it month by month. You want to do your budgeting the right way, if that's the way you can keep up with it. But most of my organizations that I work with, is we get that annual budget, and that's at 100%. And so what you show in your reports, wherever you are in the year, is just against that annual budget. So if you're at the March, which is a quarter way through the year, then that should be 25% of the budget. And I hate to say that simplify, well, it does simplify it, but the good thing about that is sometimes you're not going to spend money until September. And it's like, that line item doesn't have, 25, but you can explain it. So the recommendation here is to obviously have a budget as detailed as you want, but as you take it to the levels of the board and maybe fundraising or outside sources, obviously it's the annual budget that's important, but it's also being able to monitor it and trying to think, because if you don't, I mean, again, back to the example of grants run at different time periods and stuff like that, you have to say, oh, you can look at these numbers, but next month or next quarter, we're going to get this grant money in or whatever. And so, again, if you try to keep that out and try to keep up with all the bits and pieces, it almost gets confusing as you're looking at it. So I would just encourage you to try to step back and see if you can just do much, I mean, again, very detailed, you know where hopefully all the revenue and expenses by detail are there. But when it gets up to reporting standpoint, to do that. And the word adjust. Does anybody here adjust their budget during the year? Okay.
We always say we're willing to, I mean, that it's a kind of work.
Oh, that's not fair. Oh, we're willing to.
But.
That's like your child. Oh, I'm willing to go to school, but.
But in 11 years, we never have, and we're neck deep in budget season. I already presented salary budget, because year end is June 30th, and I've already presented the salary budget changes to the HR committee for recommendation to the board next week. And, but we have always called it a work in progress. And if we have the need, but we never really had the need. I guess we're pretty good at budgeting. One of the real challenges is we've talked about the financial piece is that with the economy, and you look at contributions last year compared to contributions this year, it's been a little kind of even, and we've never experienced that before. But on the grant side, we're finding that every single grantor is cutting their funding, and that's a little bit frustrating when they say it's because of the economy that the grantors are cutting funding. So I think it's been really hard this year to budget for next year. I think one of the things that people discovered this year was that they could no longer deduct their cash contributions, and when the taxes changed to have a really big standard deduction, and so many
Right.
people could itemize deductions,
Right.
you could still take that charitable contributions deduction. So with the economy being the way that it is, and with there being no way to deduct charitable contributions for such a large percentage of the population, I think that it's really hard to budget for general contributions.
Okay. But at the end of the day, you haven't adjusted your budget for the year in the past.
No, we have
Okay.
not.
You were,
I was just, my executive director literally argues with the board and just got a budget approved in March, and the budget's for this calendar year.
just to
And
make you
every-
feel better, that's not unusual, because everybody in there, oh, it is.
Every month it gets argued and adjusted again based on just different things going on in our organization.
Dan, you said you did adjustments?
Based on, I mean, we're looking at both revenue and expenses every month. So, if our expense per client is running higher than we thought, then we may have to adjust how many new clients we can take on later in the year. If revenues are greater than we thought, we might have the ability to serve more clients. So we're looking at that month to month.
Right, so you go into the year with a budget with certain estimates, of which there might be, and I'll just call it the baseline estimate. But if all of a sudden it gets above that, then there may be potential to, actually we're going to spend more, but we brought in more to be able to do that. What about the other side? Is there an adjustment for if we don't bring as much in?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, but you're able to make those adjustments. I
Yes.
guess, and again, we're not going to go into detailed spreadsheets about budgeting, fixed costs and variable costs, but it gets into, you were talking about the payroll, that's, I would call that variable, but really it's fixed. from a standpoint, if you want to keep employees with their whatever level, and consultants at whatever level, that is it. So, but usually, when we say adjustments, we're not moving those things around from month to month. It is kind of a flow through the year as to what happens. And so I think that from that standpoint, if you feel pretty comfortable that you've got a grasp on that, and we've got a budget and everybody's happy, and we're moving into the year, and raising funds and all that kind of stuff, let's talk about cash flow. And this is the old accounting accrual versus cash. Right? Ah, I hear some sighs in the room. That excites me as I'm bean counting. How much does that confuse a lot of our board members? And so, back to my second slide about the culture and financial literacy. Again, sometimes we have to step back and simplify a little bit on a consistent basis, from board meeting to board meeting, or from grant meeting to grant meeting, because what happens is you've got, oh, well, we got this grant. And if you have governmental grants, that is yet another issue that even though it's scheduled to come in X, or you're supposed to send them in the reports before they send the funds, there's these things. And those can be huge swings. And that doesn't feel very good if you're on the negative side of it. Because typically, you're not going to get, well, sometimes you get, here's the grant up front, it's all there. First a year, and so we're off and running, and everybody's okay, you don't have to really worry. But typically, throughout, as your activities increase, and it's across the board, you really have to be very careful as you're moving across throughout the year as to what's our cash flow. And typically, and we'll talk about this under compliance, but does anybody have like a cash flow policy within their organization that, hey, we're keeping X amount of dollars in the bank, or our goal is to keep X amount of dollars? You can't have that. You said you bring it in, you spend it. Yours is easy. Yours is easy.
We keep 600 in the bank.
That's right.
Why 600? You got me now. Why 600?
We don't go below 600.
Why? Why 600? Who picked
We
600?
might have like a post office box, or we might make a mistake, or it's just to cover us. So we just decided on 600.
How many years has it been 600?
Well, we started off, when we started, we thought we needed 2,500.
Oh.
So we got down to 600.
But, again, I don't mean to harp on this, but why 600?
Well,
Why 600?
I don't know, I just picture the cost of the books and the packaging, like one is 130 and one is 150, and we have to pay the post office box.
Right.
We just have to pay the web page.
Right?
So, we just decided, you think we could go lower?
Well, no. Don't blame me for that. What I really want to know is if you see it goes under 600, or there's some kind of surprises, what happens?
We quit ordering books.
Well, but
That's all we do. I can't order books.
all right, but then we're 2 and 3 into the computer guys, right? We gotta pay the website. We still pay the website. If it goes under 600, what happens?
Well, then, we wait until we get some money in before we order any more books.
Okay. All right. So
just
you
don't
just fund it
order
as you go. Okay. All right. Okay. Somebody over here, I think. Or,
We strive to have 6 months of operating expenses in reserve.
6 months.
Yes. Our CPA told us that years ago, because of what we did. If we get in trouble, if the community gets in trouble, the need for us is going to go up.
Absolutely.
So I run on the shoulders.
Yeah. Okay.
So 6 months of operating expenses.
Anybody else? 6?
They do 3.
3.
Our goal is a year.
Yeah.
You?
Yeah.
Right.
I have 6 months, but the goal is a year.
That's impressive.
Okay. No, that's very good. That's good. And then again, it gets back to, as you're moving through and trying to work with all the dynamics, fundraising and shareholders, I mean, the people who are actually giving the money, the grantors and the board, and trying to make those financial decisions, that's correct.
You
Now,
might have opinion.
you might have fun. And so, it might feed into something else I'll talk about in a minute. All right. So let's say we do have some money in the bank. We're not running on $600 level over there. I don't think y'all have an investment policy. That your organization book, no. But let's talk about investments. So if your organization is at a level that you do have excess money, whether that's long-term, and there may be some funds in there that somebody gave to you that they wanted, that you're just supposed to live off the principal and interest and those type of things. That's one thing. But from a standpoint of how do you approach investing, and I'll be interested, Dan, do y'all, for years, y'all keep a year. Is there any policies around the money that's in there that you are the year in excess?
We have an investment policy statement.
Okay.
It talks about short-term versus long-term investments.
Exactly. Right. So that's typically what you have. Do y'all have anything like that?
We don't have it written, but we've set up a sweep account for our board reserve account that's at at a bank, and then we have another reserve account that's at Merrill Lynch. But it's all available cash. And we're earning pretty good interest right now.
Well, yeah, today.
Today, yeah.
All right, what about you for the,
We have an investment account for money that is voted on at the end of our fiscal year in the reserve that we can move into a
back up. What did you say? What did you vote on in your, I missed
End
that.
of the year, the money that we have in reserve that we can move into CDs or money market or whatever. We also have a foundation that has money that we receive the interest and not the principal. So we
Okay.
have both.
So who makes those decisions?
The board.
So does the board have like an investment committee, or it's just the board?
It really, we have a CPA advisor who helps us.
Well, that's the right answer. But, of course,
But, yeah, I mean,
self-reliant.
we're building into this. When we have, in the past 9 years, come from a bad financial situation to being in a much better financial situation. And we're trying very hard to protect that and continue to grow it. So having available cash reserves is very important. We learned that during COVID.
Yep.
And so, it's important to us that we have available cash in the event of another whatever, that we can continue to keep the lights on and the staff paid and what have you. So we'll move part of our excess at the end of the year into an easily accessible CD or something like that, so that we can make money, let the money make some money,
Right.
but still have access to it should we need it. The
And-
foundation runs as a legacy fund.
Okay. But you make all of those decisions at year end from the
Well, it's
board?
something that we talk about throughout the year, that we discuss, this is what we have, this is where we're headed, this is what we're going to look at the end of the year.
Right.
And to make that move, that decision.
Okay. But it doesn't sound like you have an overall investment policy statement like,
No, but we need to.
right. So that the recommendation here is that no matter what size your organization, that you do need an investment policy statement, and you can get, and I'm sure Dan's, because that organization's so big, it talks about stocks and equity. I mean, it's got all this stuff in it. I'm not saying you need all that. You might, depending on what your level is. But what you want to do is get the board thinking about, look, the board needs to set kind of some parameters, because what you want is to be able to, whether it's the executive director or something, being able to be flexible, or the finance person, oh, let's get a CD for 6 months or whatever, and not having to go back at least, every single board meeting. But you start at the level of this investment policy statement says that we'll be in, at least something earning interest until we get to $1 million. And once it gets above $1 million, then something else has to take place. Either there'll be more investment policies and we may invest in something else, whatever. But just more guidelines. I think if you can help out your executive director, not giving some boundaries, but some flexibility that you're able to make investments, because the sad part is you don't want to be second guessed. You don't want to just sit in the bank. And so now, it's the last at least almost 6 to 8 months at least. If you've got your money, that, hopefully your bank account has some interest in it, but you probably, if you've got a money market account, you're doing better than anything, because you're getting the interest and all that. It's right up there. But again, that's not going to last forever. So I just, again, encourage you to get an investment policy statement, just so the board's thinking about, well, we don't have any investments. Well, you kind of do, because you have cash and you're sitting somewhere and sitting there for any time. You're investing in whether not necessarily for you, so I'll do that. So this is where we gotta. I want you to see that financing if you're keeping up on the page. I want you to draw a line through that. This is about financing. And I want you to put the words banking relationships. Okay. Because again, I'm not even going to talk about debt or all that here. We may have it, and I can talk about it offline. But the reality is that the banking relationships, and put an S on that relationship. Put an S on it. Because the one thing we learned is that even though you've got just a great relationship with your bank, they're there to help. When the pandemic hit, depending on the size of your bank and how they could help or whatever, they wanted to help a lot of times, but maybe couldn't. And I'm talking about some larger banks. I'm talking about, and I'll just say one of the larger banks in the country stumbled in such a way that they let millions of clients down, whether they're for-profit, not-for-profit, because their leadership took the stance, and we're only going to do, PPP or whatever at a certain level. And then they were like a month and a half or 2 months after everybody else. And so if you were that one institution, you were out, basically out of luck. No matter, again, you had a great relationship, but maybe the local relationship didn't help. So when I say relationships, I would say get two, and you might even want to make it one large and one very local. So I would call it a national bank and a community bank or a local bank. And the reason I say that is because what we saw during the pandemic is, lo and behold, some of the community banks were able to respond and help better than the larger institutions. And so, again, that's just a fact. And so as you're working through and working on your financials and helping just with the operating and where you want to bank and all those type things, always have in the back of your mind, just I'll say it here today, you never know what's going to happen. And so it's always good to have a couple there. The other hit, and it is a little bit harder for nonprofit organizations, but if you're very strong financially as you move forward, and you actually have funds that you invest or in excess cash, whether you think you need it or not, get a line of credit. Banks are willing, you're always willing to lend to you when you don't need it. Get the line of credit. It's going to cost a little bit probably, but again, it's that safety net. And get it as high as you can get it. I mean, it sounds silly, but get it as high as you can get it, because that just gives you one more safety net. That, as these organizations, I'm trying to keep a year's worth or 6 months worth of operating. things get bad or whatever, and we use up that cash, well, we do have another credit. Or sometimes it's the cash flow, in that, we're waiting on that big grant that we've gotten from whoever, and it comes in 2 months later than you need it, but you gotta pay payroll, and you don't wanna use up the regular cash, so you can use a line of credit. It's not that, we're going downhill, it's just, it gives that other flexibility from a financial standpoint that, depending on your board, a lot of people are very averse to debt, we don't wanna do that. But if you can explain and work through it, that it is a way to help the organization when it needs it. It may be a cash flow need just at a certain time of the year, or when things get really bad or we really need to move forward. We already have it in place, because once things fall apart, you don't get that, the bank's not going to give it to you. So you really need to work on it. All right, financial reporting. All right. Internal, again, the situation is whether it's internal staff, daily, monthly, that type of reporting that you need for within the organization, as it moves up to the board meetings or the board, and then as we're moving out, what do we need? So how many of your organizations do more than quarterly board meetings? Monthly board meetings?
Every other month.
Okay. And so my guess is financials are presented every single board meeting? Yes. Okay. And that's very appropriate. Are some of the board meetings more heavily finance discussion? I mean, it's not always the top priority, is it? Or is it? Yeah.
No. Yeah. During budget season, it's high on the priority list.
Right.
And midway through the year, so sometime in December, January, we'll do an annual meeting in January, and to really see where we are halfway through the year. And then you've been through the biggest giving month of the year, and can really judge how you're going to end up the year.
Right.
Especially with regard to contributions. One of the biggest challenges on the expense side, I don't know about everybody else, but our property insurance went from.
I think that's everybody.
Our property insurance was $75,000 last year, and if it continues to go up, it went from 26 to 53 to 75 in 3 years. And as nonprofits, I don't know how we can sustain that kind of accelerated expense.
Right. Has anybody been able to switch insurance companies or brokers?
I'm working on it.
We just
Lloyd's
did.
of London are the only people who do insurance.
You might. Well, again, you may be in a situation where you may not. I mean, you have to go with one or the other. But are you getting much breaks? I mean,
A little bit of a break, but also somebody who responds to me. Our current person sent emails to say, hey, have you found something else for us? Because what we got was $11,000 over what we paid before, and just
Right.
no response.
Right.
So switching over as we expire this year to somebody who is local and will actually talk to us.
okay, right. Any other issues related to? Well, what's the other one that goes up? Well, health insurance. Are y'all working on health insurance? Same thing.
I don't have that many people who have health insurance,
Right.
so that's not really a big thing. One of the things we were talking about is water. Water is, but, with 4 facilities and
Okay,
people
water.
that, you get something running, a toilet running, you might not know it for,
Right.
no matter how much you,
Wow. Yeah.
so water's been a real big expense. Plus, we've opened a shower and laundry facility, so we have showers and laundry going all day, every day. So, how many can we do a day? 25?
Of each.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess it sounds like, at least most of you who do have the budgeting, the financial reporting, either quarterly, every 2 months or something, and bounce it off of that. it sounds like you're able to use that for, if nothing else, an explanation. I mean, why are we so off, right? The water, those type of things. So from that, that's really very critical, so that, sometimes I feel like more than quarterly, it's some level, maybe overkill, but depending on the size of your organization and the things that you do, every 2 months or maybe 10 times a year, things like that is quite adequate. And just for my own interest, how many of you feel that 80% of your board members are kind of leaning into the financial side? 80%. Okay.
Try 8%.
60%. No. 60%?
No.
Yeah, that's kind of the counter to y'all were quick to correct me that you had more than one person that cares about finances, or two. But at the end of the day, when you've got all those board members sitting around, you have people who are interested in other things, but really do, again, to get other people's attention that really don't necessarily care. They're for the program there, they're doing that, they don't care about finances. I appreciate that, but it's worth the effort, I think, to kind of branch out some and try to help train those people too. And then the external, and probably for those of you who get grants and things that, whether it's for grants or for other things, the external reporting is important certainly than internal reporting. Again, even it's not required, but for the grants and things, it's required for that. And just putting all that together in a perspective of a story, and I'm sure that's what you do with your staff and everybody that's working on not just fundraising, but grants and other things. The external financial reporting should measure up and match up to the actual things that are occurring, or what you're hoping will occur in the next year that you're trying to get to.
Question, I'm just curious, because actually the Chapin Foundation doesn't do this, so I'm not, pointing any fingers, but how many of y'all publish an annual report for your donors, everybody? Okay, very good.
And how many annual reports are on your website? Somebody. Okay. And I've already talked about it too much, really, about the rhythm. But obviously, the financial reporting follows up from the rhythm, whether it's your fundraising season, whether it's the end of what you're doing, whether it's the beginning of what you're doing. It all kind of flows, and I feel like in the room that everybody understands what rhythm they have for their financial reporting. Okay, accountability. So for internal controls, this is a very, very old accounting terminology, internal controls. But just the fact that I think everybody here is large enough to where you just don't have one, you may have the one person with the checkbook, gives the report, signs the checks. Let me guess, on the books? So who signs the checks to buy the books?
The treasurer.
Okay.
I order the books, and the vice president checks all my work, and the treasurer writes the checks and
Right.
gets to that.
All right. And what about the deposits for when somebody gives you a check?
I do the deposits.
Okay, all right,
I do all the deposits, and I do all the ordering.
right. And so who checks all those, the revenue that's coming in? That's just the board or something?
And she comes and checks all my books.
Okay,
She's the vice president.
okay, all right. So so in an organization of which they're all volunteers, how in the world do you have internal controls? And I think you do. You're doing it really through the board.
Well, God just sent all the people to me. Ann came
Well,
up to me.
yeah, that's a higher power.
And look at that. He's
That's right.
young.
That's right. Well, and that gets to a point about trust. In God we trust, all others we verify. And that's what internal controls are about, in that, again, people do all the work and they're out there and they'll go get the check and do the deposit and do all this kind of stuff. And again, they could be just as clean, trying to do everything right and all that kind of stuff. But it's always best to have 2 or 3 people involved, kind of the checks and balances. And these other, the organizations that you are that have more people and more to do that with, it probably needs to be more formalized. And so I just encourage you to have some policies in place. Again, back to the board, to where you have these policies so that they don't really, even the other 40%, you're 60% care, another 40%, you talk about internal controls, you probably get down to 10% or whatever. But they do need to know that, look, this is how we do things, or these are our policies, that, look, we want, the person making deposits can't sign the checks. I mean, these type of things, even if it's 1 or 2 pages for policies, you need to make sure that you do have those internal controls in place for everybody's protection. Matching the non-financial activities with the financial activities. So what I listen to, so I have the benefit of being in a lot of nonprofit boards meetings. And sometimes I'm helping that organization. Sometimes that organization is helping other organizations. And so they're the ones giving out the funds or whatever. And so the conversation goes like this. Okay, we're giving them X amount of dollars. Well, what are they going to do? Oh, well, they're going to serve the community. Well, that's not. Okay, we're giving them X amount of dollars for next year. What is that going to do? And so, and I'm sure y'all been through this, but when we say the non-financial activities, if we really have to match that up for a lot of different reasons, but if we can prove to the people, the people that we want contributions from, that look, if you give us $10,000, we're going to, that $10,000 is going to help either with part of a payroll, a person that's going to go all day long and help, deliver meals or whatever. But you got to be able to track it in such a way that it's measured. And in the for-profit world, they talk about metrics. And so the metrics, the more that you can do metrics, for various reasons, for your own accountability, just with the board. Here's what we're doing, here's how, this is what we need. But even outside of that, when you're trying to get funds, when you're fundraising, those metrics, and you talk about your annual report, thank you for bringing that up. That's where you probably talk about these things, but I don't know that you throw in the money about, look, this year we raised X amount of funds and did this, whatever it was, and the next year we did this, and maybe we had more funds, but we did this amount of work. So we just got to make sure that from an accountability standpoint that we are spending what we say we're spending and what we're spending on, and know what it is. But also, it kind of proves the point. But it also gets back to what I was saying on the monies that you bring in that are restricted versus non-restricted. It's still, people don't like, oh, well, you're going to just have an operating person in the whole time. That doesn't really do any program work. Right? It's hard to prove about that operating side, but as you move through it, I would almost talk about and help work through. A lot of these things can't get done without admin work, right? So even with $10,000 worth that, we might can put $3,000 to the admin work and $7,000 to the real program, to whatever you're doing, buying the meals. And so when I say matching that, if you can break it down in such a way that makes it understandable, I've seen certainly contributing foundations give as much or more because you're able to do that. In other words, you're tying it into that and saying that, and it's not just, we're out there for the good of the cause. The more specific you can be and the more you can tie the dollars. And don't be afraid to talk about the admin. In other words, you can't ignore it. So, on the other one side, you're saying 100%, we need it for admin, versus maybe some of the dollars that we're bringing, we are spending on admin because we need to, and that's understandable. But I feel much better that if, 10,000 given and, maybe 3,000 for admin and stuff. I mean, that's okay. I mean, that's, again, you get understanding, and that helps you too, because you're not having to spend all 10,000 on a certain program. And the same thing with, the financial policies. I won't necessarily harp on this or go to the 990, but obviously some, nonprofit consultants, Together SC, they can help. Certainly they give some financial policies and all. The IRS helps because part of its form tells you about some of the policies that you have to have. So the point here is try to at least cover the bases of just the basic financial policies that you have to have to make sure that under the accountability activity that you don't have to worry, you don't have to, you know what's supposed to happen. And most of it, there's a lot to it, but sometimes in the nonprofit world, the conflict of interest policy comes in. You just got to be careful there. So I'll leave that at that. And then transparency, again with the board. It sounds like, again, this room has pretty good board relationships and executive directors of the board and things like that, that there's there's a free flow of information, certainly the financial activities that go towards the board. And so I don't think that's necessarily too much of a issue here. With donors, again, it gets back to, and it's hard because, depending on if you have 5 donors versus 5,000 donors and what the activities are, as much as you can detail from a financial standpoint of how the money is spent, where it's going, whether it's program, admin, and fundraising. People do understand that. But I don't have to tell you how important, from the donor standpoint, they want to know, well, where's my money going? And so you just need to be transparent there. And then for the grantors and grantees, again, sometimes to some of your organizations, that's more significant than the donors because your donor dollars may be smaller than your granting dollars. And so you got to make sure that from that standpoint, you're there. And as a nonprofit, again, we have to, more than for-profit organizations, you have to have everything lined up. You just have to say, here's what the numbers are, here's what we're doing, here's where we are, and staying on top of it. But it sounds like y'all are there. And then your favorite, compliance with internal controls, external requirements that, from a nonprofit standpoint, it's not, there's not a lot of different external requirements that you would have not in the nonprofit arena. But there may be some there. I mean, the housing, there's probably external requirements that you have in housing. It's not necessarily nonprofit driven, but you have to adhere to it, right? So you have to be in compliance with the housing you have and all that kind of stuff. So again, as it relates to the finances, compliance costs money sometimes too. So you got to work that into that as a look. You can't just build a building or have some space without having licenses, without having all kinds of things like that. So you got to be careful to make sure that the dollars that cover things, even when you're talking about a program, there are compliance issues as it relates to what you're doing that you may need to make sure that the board understands. And then regulatory, I'll just throw out the 990. I'm not going to bore you this morning with going through the 990, but that's, from a regulatory standpoint, while it's an IRS document, you're filing a tax return, that's the one that you got to make sure you get it right. And then as you go through that, depending on the size of your organization, the longer and longer the form gets. But once you get that and go through it and go through everything, even some of it says, even in the policies section of the Form 990, it says, this is for information only and not required by, it's not an IRS regulation. You got to answer it anyway, right? Because the IRS gets for the form. You just got to make sure that you're keeping up with that along with all the other various financial activities you're doing. So, we'll close out by kind of going back to, the financial management and stewardship, hopefully you understand, there is a difference, but they have a lot of cross and complement each other. But all of it really relates to the mission. Can you take me back to that? So are there any burning questions? And so I'll have to laugh. I was supposed to do 5 questions to deal with to help us talk through this. But anyway, so we're going to go back to this. So we got 2 questions. Oh, sorry. I messed up. Y'all see, okay, here we go. Well, here's one question now. We got 2 questions. Here's the first one. I'm the least knowledgeable about, and I was supposed to do this before we start. Sorry. Okay. All right. So we somewhat talked about detailed accounting. We didn't go into the ledger books and Excels. But I think you are it looks like everybody's pretty comfortable with financial reporting. And then the 4990, maybe Tori at some point if you want to have, not the academy, but if you want to have a 4990. But typically I think if you have an outside accountant or something that helps with the 990, it's like other things. If you need to hire an outside consultant, it's probably better and more use of time and money to get that help than do it yourself to understand it. But certainly is a big play as it relates to financials.
Doug, could
Yes,
we
sir.
have one quick question to that? Because one of the things that we talk about with, I think, that I'm asked a lot about, and having an audit done and how expensive that is, especially for a smaller nonprofit organization. What would be the next best option to be able to submit to somebody that you're asking for money from?
Okay, as I'm listening to your question, I'm nervously looking to see if Zero gets anything on the scoring response. Y'all are too kind. You're too kind. So that's a great question. Again, some of the bigger grants, governmental, require an audit, and you have to check that box if it's so large. But a lot of the local, state, I would say a lot of the foundations, that is a box you're supposed to check. However, there has been some flexibility in that, well, we can't pay for an audit, but in the accounting terminology, it's 3 levels of accounting. You have compliance work, you have review financial statements, and you have audits. Okay? So compliance is usually they do your bookkeeping, they give you your financial statements, monthly, quarterly, whatever. The CPAs do that, somebody outside does that. But that review process, to your point, is that what if we can have a review instead of an audit? That's kind of the first step, and if you can do that. I got to tell you, the cost, you'll be shocked at how it's not as inexpensive as you think. In other words, the audit's going to cost us $15,000, and you get a review for 9 or 10 or something. So it's still going to cost something. So it's not sometimes not a dramatic difference. And if it's not, then you may just go ahead and jump and get the audit. The other avenue you can try, and I have done some letters for clients like this, some of my small organizations. The funder, if they get a letter from your accountant that says something to the effect that we found this organization to follow all regulations and requirements throughout their financial activities over the X amount of years or something, there's some fancy wording to it. But it's kind of it's almost like a support letter from your CPA that says they follow the regulations or whatever. And I think that's what the grantors, again, at different levels have different things, but that's what you're really concerned about is that, you've got credibility and the 2 things here, that you've got financial management, you have financial stewardship. If you have that, then that's what they're looking for. What you got to give them to prove it, it's not the end of the explanation is, you don't just have to check the box. Sometimes you do, depending on how big the organization, and then you're out. But don't let that stop you, because I do have, I've had organizations where like, well, we're going to apply for that, but you got to have an audit. Well, let's go and ask, right? Because there are situations that a lot of these foundations will go, they have different levels, and that might just be the level you send, and they have another level that they give. You might not get 100,000, but you might get 12 or something. That's other questions? Okay, well, it looks like we made some, movements to the right. Y'all at least increased your knowledge through our, I guess, hour and 15 minutes together. So without that, I'm going to be rude because I've got to get on another meeting that started at 10. So I'm happy to stay around for a few minutes. But thank you for your attention. Thank you for